There's two common traps that people fall for when it comes to quitting smoking weed or quitting nicotine products. Two traps that I personally fell victim to when I struggled with addiction to nicotine, THC, energy drinks, and adult media content for several years of my life. The first of the two traps is pretty obvious, and this is the cycle of cravings. The second of the traps, though, is a lot more insidious, and it's rooted a lot deeper in our mindset surrounding the substance use. So let's look at the trap of cravings first. When it comes to cravings, what happens is the person consumes the drug, whether it's nicotine or weed, the blood levels of the substance rise, and then eventually those blood levels start to fall off or deteriorate. Once the drug, whether it be THC or nicotine, begins to leave our system, we start to get a craving. And cravings often invoke feelings of anxiety or stress or sadness. It's kind of a fight or flight response. It feels like a life or death situation because your body has now prioritized that drug on the same level of food or water or as something that's a necessity to your survival. So then you consume the drug again, and then you feel a sense of relief. And the cycle starts all over again. Blood levels rise, blood levels fall, you get a craving, consume the drug, and then you feel better. This is a common trap that people fall for because it kind of solidifies the idea that the substance is helping them. And this is often rooted in the idea that nicotine or weed is alleviating feelings of stress, feelings of anxiety, feelings of boredom, feelings of depression. And once we reinforce that notion that the drug is helping us, it's very, very hard to see the drug for what it is. Something that's actually keeping us trapped all day long in the cycle of cravings, withdrawal symptoms, drug consumption. Cravings, withdrawal symptoms, drug consumption. That's the more obvious of the two traps. The second trap, though, as I said earlier, is a lot more insidious and, in my opinion, a lot more dangerous. A lot of times when I would go to quit smoking, I would say, okay, today's the day I'm going to quit. Tomorrow's the day I'm going to quit. Next week I'm going to quit. Next year I'm going to quit. After this special event I'm going to quit. And for years, I never actually made up my mind when it came to quitting. And in turn, I spent years of my life obsessing over the concept of finally quitting smoking weed, finally quitting consuming nicotine products. And this is the secondary trap that I'm talking about. A lot of people, unfortunately, are going to spend their whole lives focused on trying to make a singular decision, a decision that's really rooted in the idea of bettering oneself, and that's quitting substances. And if you struggle with addiction and you're anything like me, that means that you have either the gift or the curse of obsession. And I found myself for years obsessing over the concept of getting through day one. And then in many of my prior quit attempts, I would then obsess over, well, is this going to be long term? Am I going to quit for good? Am I going to relapse? Am I going to go back to it? Maybe I should have waited until next weekend, next week Monday, next week Sunday. And what happened was I spent years of my life stuck on day one when it came to quitting. And this is the secondary trap of addiction that we often see when it comes to nicotine, weed. We could say the same thing for alcohol, gambling, or deep adult media content. We're trapped in this cycle of addiction because we spend so much time obsessing over days 1, 2, and 3 versus just going through with the decision, going through with the commitment to quit for the long term. And there's advantages and disadvantages to different approaches that people take when it comes to quitting. There's certainly the approach of one day at a time. And when you're first quitting a substance, I'll say for the first 90 days, I think one day at a time is a really good mantra or a really good mindset, because going the rest of your life without the drug might seem overwhelming, especially if you're still under the perceived benefits that you get from the substance. You think it's helping with the depression or the anxiety or the pain relief, whatever it may be. So one day at a time works well there. At one point, I would advise shifting away from one day at a time, because one day at a time means, well, tomorrow could be the day I falter. The next day could be the day that I relapse. It's almost as if you're just obsessing over waiting a return to drug consumption, whether that be nicotine or cannabis products. So I'd say past the first 90 days, it would probably serve you well to get away from the concept of one day at a time, because you made a decision, you're committed to it, and you're going to see that decision through. Making a singular decision should not take a lifetime. And unfortunately, for a lot of people who struggle with addiction, it takes a lifetime in some cases. People will be addicted to a drug from the age of 15 years old all the way up until they die somewhere in their 70s or 80s. They spend their life obsessing over this idea of, I'll quit tomorrow, I'll quit next week, I'll quit after whatever the special event is. And this is the more insidious of the two traps, and this is one of the very, very sneaky manipulative ways that addiction keeps us hooked in this cycle for the rest of our lives. But once you see it for what it is, once you start to see through the delusion and the manipulation of addiction, it makes a lot more sense saying, oh, I'm just going to make a clear-cut decision when it comes to quitting, and I'm going to see that decision through. Because if you keep faltering on that decision and going back and forth, what it's actually doing is creating a lot of mental fatigue and mental anguish. And this is one of the tools, this mental fatigue, that addiction uses to draw a person into a relapse. People will literally get so tired and so burned out psychologically surrounding the concept of day one quitting, or surrounding the ideology of one day at a time, that eventually they reach this point of exhaustion, mental exhaustion and burnout, and they simply go back to using the substance. And this is certainly not how I wanted to live the rest of my life. This is certainly not how I want you to live the rest of your life. And when you see it for what it is, it's an easy mindset to change, and it's even easier then to break free of this cycle of nicotine or THC addiction. Now, if you're really struggling with the first trap, which is the cycle of addiction that's rooted in cravings, I would highly recommend checking out our Kick It Crave Less chewing gum that contains KSM-66 ashwagandha and N-acetylcysteine. The KSM-66 helps to reduce stress and anxiety. The NAC helps to reduce cravings. We put it in a chewing gum for maximal absorption and something that's fast acting, as compared to a capsule or a pill that you could find on Amazon or at your local supplement store. If it's the secondary thing that you're really struggling with, I would recommend either one, following me into the next video where I interview a very special guest speaker about this one day at a time concept, or look into booking a one-on-one coaching call where I'll work with you to really get to the root of what's going on and what we need to do to create that shift in mindset to set you free from this cycle of addiction. It's all rooted in mindset. That's really what it is at the end of the day, and seeing through the delusion that addiction creates. Follow me into the next video or hit me up in the pinned comment or video description. Until next time.